Good evening and welcome to the Green Live. I'm really excited for this event tonight, and thank you so much for joining us for the Green Future Warm Homes for All. I'm Tyrone Scott. I'm a former campaigns officer for the Young Greens, which is the youth wing of the Green Party, and I was on the executive committee there for 18 months. I now also sit on the executive committee of the Young Greens of Colour, and previously I was a Green Party candidate for the Hackney South and Shoreditch area in the last general election. And professionally also, I work as a community organiser for Shelter, the national housing charity, and that work is all around empowering sort of local communities and supporting community-led campaigns to try and resolve and fix their housing issues. And today, before I have our guests introduce themselves, just going to do a small bit of housekeeping. So we're going to go through sort of some questions today and some conversations between myself and the panelists, and then we'll have just under 20 minutes for questions in the second half of this event. So the event, if you please put your questions in Q&A for upvoting, we'll try and answer as many as we can. But as the talk is going on, please do put your questions in there, and you can upvote which question you would like to hear most at the end of the talk, and we can then try and get through as many of the questions as possible. But tonight, I've gathered some leaders who work at the intersect of green housing, green energy, and community resilience, working to help shape the urgent systems change required to deliver green homes for all. So please join me in welcoming our guests tonight. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by asking our excellent panelists to introduce themselves, their change-making work, and how it gives them. I'm going to start with Agamemnon. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. And my name is Agamemnon Otero, as you said. I'm the chief exec for Energy Garden, and I founded Brixton Energy, Community Energy England, Community Energy in general. So Brixton, Dunster House, Vauxhall Energy, and yeah, I have worked across the sector in finance and renewables over the last 12 years in the UK. But I grew up studying the resilience and living on farms and co-ops in the US.
Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more as we continue the conversation. And moving on to Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself and your change-making work and how it gives you hope?
Hiya, I'm Lauren. I'm Deputy Leader of Wales Green Party, soon to be co-founder of UBI Lab Newport, and I also volunteer on the allotment of my local food bank, Feed Newport. My work for Wales Green Party, I've been Deputy Leader for just shy of a year now. I actually became Deputy Leader during the first lockdown, so it hasn't actually been what I imagined it to be. A lot of it has been the mixed race, working class, bisexual thorn in their side, saying this is what we've got to do to make our party more representative, making constitutional changes and policy changes that help lift everyone up. And yeah, we're going to be talking about retrofitting and stuff today. I'm really excited to talk to you about that.
Great, thank you. And yeah, lastly, on to Bill. Could you introduce yourself and the work that you do, please?
Hello, I'm Bill Dunster. I'm an architect. I started Zed Factory, which is zero fossil energy developments. We basically nearly 25 years ago. So we've been trying to do zero carbon, zero waste housing, new communities ever since then. Currently, we built a home at the BRE, which had no net annual energy bills. We've built housing in many places of the UK, and we're currently promoting a tiny house system, which is the first one to be vertically stacked to achieve high densities, and we're building that in somebody's barn in Petworth.
Sounds very interesting, very innovative.
Yeah, and there is obviously a lot of work we do on retrofit, but there's too much to talk about in one.
No, thanks, Bill. So yeah, to start the conversation today, I thought we'd look to set the scene a little bit and maybe try and help define and explain some of the terms that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to go back to Agamemnon and just ask, could you start by explaining what fuel poverty is and how a few of your projects work to solve it by empowering communities to take cooperative ownership of the intersex between solar power, electricity, plants, and urban gardening?
Yeah, sure I can. So the government defines fuel poverty as those who spend more than 10% of their average annual income on energy. And then they've defined certain areas that are super output areas where a grouping of people fall into that condition, and where there is a great sense of inequality that has pervaded in that area. So they can then look at measures both with local authorities and with industry, so the energy supply companies and the district network operators, the people who run the power supplies, to address those issues. And the work that I have focused on and as a cooperative, a cooperator, I've set up a number of about 10 not-for-profit cooperatives across London. And in that capacity, I have to work with we've been between 4 and 15 other directors in each one of those co-ops to then help facilitate a dynamic change. And that started its journey in about 11 years ago in Brixton, where we sort of sought out the sort of super output area there, and directly addressed cold issues in and around Brixton, particularly in the Loughborough estate, which was seeing up to 60 deaths a year due to cold-related issues. So, and thereby classified as a super output area, and a great deal of people who were suffering from those issues. And so we built a not-for-profit cooperative around energy, and it was the first community-owned renewable energy project on social housing in an urban area. And so there was the first set of lease agreements, and we worked with E.ON and the energy supply company, and they had an obligation to help work in the super output area. And so our job in the retrofit area was E.ON was actually using some government funding to put on cladding on the outside of the buildings, and then we raised secondary funding to put solar panels onto the rooftop, and due to that we were then able to sell carbon that would be forecasted, and with that money we were able to build a network of facilitators who could then who were taught how to install installation and simple measures in their home, energy efficiency workshops. And so while the deep retrofit was being done with our partner, the energy supplier that was working with the local authority to upgrade the buildings, we could then have the capacity to then provide engagement and communication on that. A lot of the members that were in those properties were not the primary leaseholder, and they were in fuel poverty, and some of them didn't speak English, so we would translate, we would get in there, give them help them understand the measures that were available. So I think there's a really human side to communicating the sort of this element of retrofit, because one thing was just popping on the cladding, putting in the insulation, walls, roof, and we were just adding eco bling in a way. But by bringing the cooperative together, we were able to get people engaged and involved, and then have them understand it. And so I remember Shamsa Kamal was of Ethiopian origin, but had grown up in Brixton, had 3 children, and was living in this estate. And her understanding of what was happening was not clear. And so by helping her, we were able to switch over her energy supplier. We were able to give her energy efficiency measures in the home, and also recognize that by putting on insulation onto the building and in the roof, what they had done was they had made it a little plastic box So then we installed measures to create ventilation. So with retrofitting comes the not only making it warmer, but also recognizing that the condensation issues were there. So by having a cooperative where we could directly address these issues, it was enabling the retrofit process, which we did. Was a full 11 million pound retrofit process, which we were involved in. And that process has continued over the last 11 years from Brixton, and could give you tons of stories like Bill. I mean, he's the grandfather and of his whole group who have been delivering this for years prior to way before us. But we have examples of that both through Brixton Hill, all the way to Vauxhall, up into Hackney, right around the corner from where you are in Homerton Estate. Yeah.
Thanks, Agamemnon. That's really, really fascinating, and it's great to hear how it's so embedded within the communities, and the empowerment in there is within the community work that you do. And as somebody who works in campaigns around housing, really great to hear those links with social housing too, and really impacts those communities. And you touched on, or really explained well, how retrofitting came into this, and Lauren, maybe expand on explaining what retrofitting is, or share how Green Party policies work to solve fuel poverty.
So retrofitting is when you take the old leaky housing stock, which is all over Britain, like the house I'm in now, typical 70s, 80s red brick council houses, but all houses really. And you make them more energy efficient. At the moment, in terms of VAT, it's actually more profitable to build new homes to Passivhaus standard than it is to repair and to sort out the houses we've got. So in terms of policy, our policy is that we would have this massive retrofitting scheme, and that will take people out of fuel poverty, and not just in terms of the people who live in those homes, but it's the job creation that comes with it. And it's also the social justice policies, because it's the UBI, it's lifting everybody up that ensures everyone has what they need to survive. And it's such a wide-ranging thing. I can't sit here and say retrofitting is all we're going to do to take people out of fuel poverty, because it's everything. It's so much more than that.
And sort of bringing private housing homes up to a standard that people can really, well, up to an adequate standard. And as we're talking on that, Bill, you maybe explain what the Passivhaus standard is, and new homes and urban infrastructure built to that of a similar standard to that to prevent the acceleration of climate breakdown.
Well, yes. I mean, Passivhaus is only an Excel spreadsheet, so it's not perhaps the most useful thing for discussing retrofit. The story is that if you really insulate a building properly, and that be, say, U value of 0.145 or thereabouts for the walls, you make it reasonably draft proofed, so that you're not losing air coming in from the outside when it's really cold. You put heat recovery ventilation in, so outgoing stale air preheats incoming fresh air. And if you're clever with orientation, so that you're getting a benefit from south-facing windows and passive solar gain. If you've got a little bit of thermal storage from radiant floors and ceilings and walls, that's great, because you get that gives you a thermal flywheel effect. And that reduces your thermal demand to the point where you don't really need heating at all. And that's really where we've all got to get. And that means that the all-electric home is possible. And you can then, by reducing your thermal demand to that, your space heating demand to almost nothing, you're just left with domestic hot water demand. That's water for washing. And that's really fairly easy to meet from the area of solar panels that's put on the roof of a typical British home up to a certain density band. And even then, on higher densities, you can start putting it on the vertical walls as well, with building integrated photovoltaics. So that's really the big story. If you do the energy efficiency, fabric first right, then renewable energy really starts to work. Reduced demand and renewable energy works. What doesn't work is just trying to meet existing demand with renewable energy. I think that's what Passivhaus is saying. I personally think it's very dangerous, and I think we need to be much more flexible in how we interpret these kind of rules. It's just a brand. We've got to come up with things that really work for us in the UK, things that work in retrofit. It's not always helpful to spend a lot of money on say air tightness if you've not fitted any renewable energy and so on and so forth. So it's a very it's a complex subject. It's not. I'm afraid it's not simple, and I definitely think lots of things need discussing. Space standards needs discussing. Our homes are often too big. We're trying to heat vast volumes where we're not actually occupying them. We're running around in t-shirts most of the time. There's a whole series of things which are just mad. And we can obviously, if the standards for new build went back to where they should have been in 2016, when the government was going to make the code level 6 of the Code for Sustainable Homes mandatory, then that would have introduced a whole set of technologies gone into volume production in the UK, which could have then been rolled out for the retrofit agenda. And that is happening in other countries, mainly in Europe. But it's everything to play for. And all I would try to say is that please believe it's possible. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't try it.
No, that's definitely right, and that's inspiring words. And just because we may have had missed opportunities in the past doesn't mean we're going to have many opportunities that we need to seize in the future when we're talking about how we're going to build a greener future and ensure that the homes that we have are sustainable. And as we talk around the issues on warm homes for all, Lauren, I wondered if you could, well, when it comes to issues around warm homes for all, they're partially devolved from British Parliament to the Senedd in Wales. So how does that devolvement of power to community or to country bring swifter waves of meaningful change in Wales?
So first, maybe I'll go into a little bit of background why we have devolution in Wales at the moment. So I'm sure most people watching this will know we have over 600 members of Parliament in Westminster. Of those, Wales has just 40, and the upcoming boundary changes will reduce that to 32. And in fact, if you add up all of the members of Parliament from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, it doesn't even come close to England. The Welsh population is older, it's sicker, it's poorer, so we have very different needs, which is why we have the Senedd in the first place, because those representatives are closer to our communities. And the regional list is proportional as well. So every person will have 4 proportionally elected representatives as well as their constituency representatives. So it's a more diverse and representative voice of the population. But so devolution should work in that context, but what we have in Wales is a completely inadequate Barnett formula, which doesn't take into account the social need. We don't have enough funding to implement the decisions we need to make for our population. And there's also the Internal Markets Bill, which is a really fury-inducing Westminster power grab, which overrides decisions on housing, on the NHS, basically anything that could be sold off. So I would love to sit here and say devolution is great, but actually I'm really disillusioned about it in the Welsh context. I'm sure it would be great for communities in England, but devolution only works when those with power actually respect those they're giving power to. So for Wales, independence is the only option.
Thank you, Lauren. It was really strong words there, and I think we've really spoken a lot around empowerment earlier on today. Empowerment communities to make that change, and I think that's going to be a theme that runs through everything that we're speaking about today. And moving back to you, Agamemnon, the last time you visited us as a guest, you mentioned having read Eleanor Ostrom's Governing the Comms. With her work in mind, what does democracy have to do with solving issues around everyone having access to warm homes? Beyond voting, how do each of us find our role in the ecosystem of change?
Oh, I've chosen the path of cooperation, and so one of the most profound things that I feel that one can do is work in fellowship with others to do that. And by using the cooperative structure, you can gain a great deal of momentum against what a system which seems to be, as Bill was highlighting and Lauren were highlighting, a very difficult place to maneuver and quite complex. But the hive mind is quite powerful. And so one of Eleanor Ostrom's, just to remind people, she was a Nobel Prize winner for her work, and she and her deceased husband, she carried on his work, which was 40 years, and she carried it on another 20 years, which was looking at how do we communally govern land, and what are the aspect of governance that are used in stewarding woods or fisheries on rotation. And one of the key elements was that the working together with clarity on what could be gained and delivered. So for example, in fisheries, or if you fished out an area, then it would have a negative impact on all of the others. But if you kept a certain quota and then everybody kept it going, then you would actually enhance the fishery to be able to do that. So that's the same with the forestry. And that, I believe, can be replicated in the urban environment, where if you are a member of that community and working to understand it and be a part of it, that if you work cooperatively, you can address those issues. And they are what I was trying to exhibit earlier in the story of Brixton, but what I have really tried to scale in the examples of Energy Garden, which I focus on my day-to-day now, which is a citywide program where we're really focusing on, you've got 135 community groups. There's over 300 active members every day working across 34 gardens, where they're engaged with sustainability. And we do energy efficiency workshops. We do and provide information around retrofit and information around energy and supply, but actually also around just the wider degrees of sustainability. And they're all a part of the cooperation. They're all members in the cooperative. And so it's a one vote, one share cooperative. It doesn't matter if you have 50 pounds or 50 million pounds, you still have one say. So that's value. Because I've been reading these questions that they're there. They're like, did you raise the money for what was the insulation product you use? And we can go through all that. And like there was Kingspan that was used on insulating the Loughborough estate, which made people's houses and lives better. Was that the best thing for the environment? No, Kingspan is not the best thing. I've used hempcrete, I've used sheep's wool, I've used paper insulation. I've retrofitted a domestic, a terraced London house, all sorts, a boat. I've done it in many different conditions, and everyone, as Bill was saying, is different. But you can come up with solutions, and when you're working in community, you can come up with community solutions, and that might mean raising money. It might mean communicating, because I studied architecture, and I have advanced environment energy at the Center for Alternative Technology, and that goes through UEL. And one of the key elements from of learning there was the idea that we as individuals can make specific changes and use all of the elements that are out there, all the natural elements. But there is something more complex in working in the built environment to understand, which is that a building is usually can be made very energy efficient. But if the members that use it are not aware of all the tools and gadgets and how it flows, they can upset the equilibrium, which was designed in by the zero emission design that was put there. And so it's all about how do we communicate? How do we create not just smart cities, but socially smart cities to deliver this? And I think that's where community can be a very important part of this discussion. So how do we communicate to the communities who are most in need? How do they feel empowered to make those changes happen? A lot of these questions you can just ask Uncle Google and say, what's the resource out there? Is hempcrete better than concrete? Can I use sheep's wool, whatever? But to have Lauren and Bill here to be able to sort of communicate what they do in their constituent worlds, and even my limited humble experiences, we can share those ideas of how the political and the infrastructure can be enhanced by the community galvanizing around these issues.
Thank you very much. And it's really great to hear how much, again, the centers on the community. As someone who even works professionally as a community organizer, that always centers around the work that I do. And I think real change always comes from from empowering those with that experience. And yeah, it's really fantastic to hear that carries through with your work as well. And just to move on to you, Bill, around the same subject, how can we really empower people, or how can people empower themselves to start to use their democratic rights to start to create and implement these solutions?
Oh, difficult question. I think my advice is possibly you have to set up a parallel system, creating your own initiatives within the existing system. So, for example, you can get yourself locked into a very energy hungry lifestyle. You can live in a house that has a very high carbon footprint. You can spend a lot of carbon footprint on transport and food and so on and so forth. Or you can try and sort out all these issues yourself. And you can gradually opt out of the conventional system as promoted on the television or the newspapers or whatever. And it's this development of parallel and successful low carbon or zero carbon lifestyles and work styles that's really where the work's got to happen. And that is really good. There are plenty of good community initiatives that show all these things starting to happen. And what we're seeing is it's a process we've sort of started now. For example, about 5 years ago, I built an e-bike with a 1 kilowatt hour battery. Actually has two 1 kilowatt hour batteries, but 1 kilowatt hour battery. And then I worked out that actually that battery was enough. I could charge that battery with two 175 watt solar panels, which was quite cheap. And then I found that I could actually live a complete day with the electricity from that battery for most of the year. Then I found that you could take that battery and you could power a classroom off it. Say in a country that didn't have good mains electric supply, and then you gradually sort of find, well, actually, you've solved your transport problems, you've solved your communication problems because it runs laptops and so on. It can power your telephone, it can get you to work and back. It's powered off renewable energy, and the cost is not so high. So you basically take yourself off the grid almost room by room, or idea by idea, or activity by activity. So you're developing, it's simple transition theory, but you're moving from one system to another, but you're not fighting their system, you're not fighting the status quo, you're just simply bypassing it. And I just think that's the future. That's how we have to all act and behave. And we haven't got much time to do it because as we run out of natural capital and as climate change accelerates, there will be more and more stress on the existing way of doing things. And where there's stress, there's conflict, and there's no collaboration, no cooperation, and communities fight each other. Whether it's the Welsh fighting the English, or the English fighting everybody. So I feel there's a plan there, and it's working, and you can introduce these ideas into existing buildings. You can introduce them into new buildings, and we are. So there is hope, and it can start with an incredibly low budget. You don't have to patronize Elon Musk and buy a Tesla Powerwall and spend lots of money on solar, but you can start this process very quickly, very easily. No excuse, frankly.
Oh, brilliant. No, thank you. And I particularly like the notion of not fighting the system, but simply bypassing it. And I think that's a line that I've probably take from you now, Bill. So thank you very much for that one. And just to move on to Lauren, and we're talking about all the solutions that we have, and the solutions that are, quite clearly already in front of us in many ways. And how do you help people understand how the solution to fuel poverty and carbon neutrality is integrated?
Well, this actually comes up quite often. I'm seeing people saying, why have we got to focus on social justice? Why can't we just focus on environmental justice? And for me, fuel poverty is a social justice issue. But it's really interesting to hear a panelist say just now that there is no excuse for not doing it, because, my own lived experience is that's not the case. Around about 7 years ago, I was made homeless with my children, and every penny for about a month was accounted for. That's every penny I had coming in. That's every penny I could borrow. And we were in true survival mode. And understanding the solution to fuel poverty and carbon neutrality are interlinked is knowing that when you are in that survival mode, you don't care about the cleanliness of your energy mix or the environmental impact of your food. Everything you have is going towards keeping yourself alive. It's going towards keeping your kids alive. And in one of the richest countries in the world, that is shameful. And to say that there is no excuse for trying when some people actually can't do more than they already are, I think that's also shameful. Understanding that link, getting other people to understand that link, means more people have got a platform, people like me with lived experiences of the issues you hope to solve, and using that knowledge to agitate for change. And I hope everyone is paying attention to that today.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. It's really powerfully said, and it's really interesting. I was in a conversation last week around the climate conversation generally in the wider participation, and why there isn't participation from certain demographics. And one of the sort of conversation topics went on to how many times people in the situations there's many things that are affecting their chance for survival potentially before the climate becomes their immediate concern. And that's a very, very sad fact sometimes, because the climate is everybody's immediate concern, but often you can find yourself in situations where you aren't able to even acknowledge that, because there are many more immediate concerns right on your doorstep too. So it's a very interesting point to bring up, and it's interesting how that's come through both recent conversations on quite different topics I've had over the last week. So as we sort of move on, we'll have the Q&A quite soon, but just the sort of last couple of points. There are often tensions within solution building, and a need for urgent action can be blocked by a delay in a much needed collective mindset shift. We need urgent action. At the same time, a lot of that urgent action requires a mindset change. So what are some of the mindset blocks that you all face in your work, and how do you sort of fill that gap? How do we all fill that gap? And I'll begin with you there, Agamemnon.
I always get the sort of bop. Yeah. Can you say that again? Break it down a little bit for me.
Yeah, no, of course. So it's around often when we're looking to take this urgent action, it also requires that collective mind shift, or could even be mind shift within your own work. So what are some of the mindset blocks that you faced in your work, and how do we overcome that?
I think it's interesting. Lauren was sort of highlighting the sort of the differences that we have as panelists. And I have directly addressed the fuel poverty issue for many years, and it's I think that stereotypes about what people are and how they do are so divisive to the narrative. And that is one of the biggest things that I have been struggling with. Like for instance, this year, Patagonia, the sort of outdoor clothing brand, is going to be, their campaign is going to be community energy, and they want to see a really help get people involved in installing renewable energy and all about retrofit and stuff like that, which is great. And they followed us around and they did some filming of the work we were doing. But the narrative of the filming crew and of the people who didn't understand what we were trying to do was one around like sort of one that I think a great deal of people suffered from. I have a house, and therefore I'm going to help you person who's in fuel poverty. I'm going to help you out of this, and I know what's best for you. And that can be, as I think Lauren is highlighting, very patronizing, because when you have nothing and you can't do anything, the lights going on is all you can do. And that is really, when people are stuck between the heat or eat dilemma, it's very difficult to say, I want solar. And I've been at the you can mix your metaphors here. I've been at the coalface for a while. And one of the most fascinating things was that when we did surveys and door knocking around, we have an energy cooperative, we want to help you with retrofit, we want to put solar, we want to do all these things that are going to hopefully enhance your life. People were, this is the first thing that we came against, was that the assumption from local authority, from cabinet members and from MPs, was that people who were in fuel poverty didn't understand climate change and just wanted whatever was going to be there given to them. Energy would go on. That was wrong. They would prefer to have renewables and they would prefer to be warmer. It's just that life circumstances weren't there. And they did know that anthropogenic climate change was a reality. And they did want to do something. And the second one was that the idea that people, again, this assumption that that those of us who are in the know better and can help those who don't know out of it, and then we get a pat on the back. And that sort of idea where we all send money to Africa to help people who we, at arm's length, as opposed to the 37,000 people a year which die of air quality related issues because of our bad quality, or 40-odd thousand people a year that are dying of coal related issues in the UK. We have an epidemic in our own country. And the idea that you do something for someone else as opposed to with them is another stereotype and a mindset which I have struggled against. So if you work together to help facilitate that change and say, look, I will be a part of this cooperative with you. I don't know what you go through, but I want to help do what you do. And that assumption that we as in fellowship work together to deliver that is that is a major struggle. And then finally, that people who don't have the ability to change their environment don't have the money to do it and don't want to spend the money is also there's sort of a poverty consciousness and an assumption that those who don't have money don't want to invest what they do have in the future. And I can attest to hundreds of people who've invested into community energy share offers, which would provide long-term 20-30 year energy efficiency measures, fuel poverty issues like free measures for their homes and education, who didn't have any money coming in and were living check to check, who would allocate and say, can I pay cash for my share in this cooperative because I want to see this change happen. Meanwhile, ministers or councillors wouldn't put in more than 50 pounds in there and say, well, I'm skint. So there is an idea around that's a very big thing around poverty consciousness, not just for those who are not for those who are in poverty, but those who are in a mind poverty around how people who will really need help need to be helped. They think they need something done to them as opposed to being lifted up as an equal. And those are the three barriers which I've faced personally in the development of cooperative energy around energy efficiency and renewable energy generation over the last 12 years in the UK.
Thank you very much, Agamemnon, really. And I'm really conscious. I want to sort of hog the questions for myself, but there's so many questions coming through the Q&A, so thank you so much for putting them through. But before I move on this sort of same topic around that sort of mindset shift and mindset blocks, is that sort of touched upon your work, Bill, at all, before we move swiftly to the Q&A?
Yes, I suppose what we've learnt after trying to do the same thing for a long time is that really everything is now possible. It's just, how do you persuade others to change their preconceptions? And there is this feeling that it's all too expensive, or it's a middle class luxury, or this or that. And that's why we concentrated the last year on a stackable tiny house, because we wanted to show you we could really take people who were camping, and there's a lot of people camping in this part of suburban London, out in recreation fields, just on the side of leftover public spaces. There's a lot of homelessness. There's a lot of there's slum boats on the river. There's people in the woods. There's no question we've got a housing crisis. There's absolutely no question at all. And we've also got an environmental crisis. And if you could, what we want to do is we wanted to show that actually you could create a really warm, climate neutral home that's, yes, it's quite small, but it's so much better than camping through the winter. And it's so much better than sleeping on someone's sofa. And no, it doesn't meet space standards, which upsets all the champagne socialists, and so on and so forth. But could you afford it? Yes. Could you build it yourself? Yes. Is there space and land available for people to house themselves? Yes. Is this land being used for anything meaningful? No. Whether it's car parks, hard standings, leftover spaces. You can even put these things over existing functions like parking or existing buildings. So all of these ideas, we could solve our problems if we wanted to, and it wouldn't be a big social cost, because the cost of not solving the problems is higher than the cost of solving the problems. So I think it is solutions based, and I think it is it requires this alternative, this generosity of spirit. But if we can demonstrate by example, and people can come stay in these things, or they can be amused by them, or they can see how it has dignity and it does solve problems, and how it does redress the inequality in society, and still meet all the long-term environmental performance targets. Well, that's the game. That's what we're all hoping for. What upsets me most is all the people who say it can't be done, or I'm all these dreams about a society with this appropriate environmental technologies are just unaffordable. Well, actually, no, they're not. And part of the problem is if we can reduce our demand just by wanting less. Small, there's the book that started the environmental movement in the UK is E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. Who's reading that today? Not many people. Well, it's great, but the point is that is the point. There is no other point.
No, and it shows really the importance of these innovative solutions. And what really shone through for me there was the intersectionality between addressing the climate crisis and the housing crisis. As someone who campaigns professionally for the housing crisis and for the climate crisis and all of the time aside from that, one of my biggest fears is that when those in power, if they do look to address these crises, they'll look to address the housing crisis without the other in mind, and vice versa. And that's not how we're going to find any of these sustainable solutions. And in the theory of me just carrying on and taking the last 15 minutes with my own questions selfishly, I will move on to the Q&A because there's so many engaging questions here. So apologies if you're not going to be able to get through them all. But thanks for voting and engaging as well, because it's made it easier to select through. And we'll begin with the top question here, and this is really about how we can begin to practically apply these solutions. And from Keith Abbard, and as a district councillor sitting on a planning committee, how can I ensure that new build housing is built to the best standards for installation and energy use? And I'll leave that open for whoever would like to jump in first. But
I'll do a really quick answer. Just simply request code 6 EN1 level 6 codes of the Code for Sustainable Homes. It was fully documented. It was ready in 2016. It works absolutely fine, and it delivers zero carbon, climate neutral housing. You can go further and add embodied carbon footprint into it, so you get a whole life carbon footprint for the housing system, but that's not something I could explain in 5 minutes. But it is now possible to design new homes which are cheap to build, are affordable within current affordable housing cost targets, and they generate a slight surplus of renewable energy every year, which offsets the carbon footprint of the original construction, and that is paid back within a 25 to 35 year period. Never been possible in human history before, really. So this is a major cultural moment. I think, you know, this is part of the evolution of the species. We are now capable of doing climate neutral infrastructure and climate neutral buildings if we wanted to.
Brilliant. Oh, no, thanks very much there, Bill. And I hope that was really useful. And was anyone else want to jump in on that one at all? Any other? No. Great. Well, I'll sort of move on to the next one. And it may be for you more here, Lauren. Apologies if it's singled off. But how is the Green Party going to challenge the current corrupt system? You know, at present, developers do what they want. There's a lack of planning, destruction of arable land, and construction of low quality buildings.
Well, that's easy by getting elected to councils, to Parliament, our two wonderful peers in the House of Lords, challenging the government, whether that's Westminster or local, every single day. I strongly recommend you in particular look at the great work Brighton and Hove Council have done in I think it was something like £25 million worth of funding, even in a COVID recovery, for the climate. And Natalie, Jenny and Caroline, their fantastic work in Parliament. In fact, Caroline's been really great at holding the government to account on a number of issues today. Just look at her work with the Good Law Project as a great place to start.
Bro. Thank you very much, Lauren. And I think the next question, I'll begin with you, Agamemnon, on this one, and it's from Andrew Meyer. And it's given the current lack of awareness about retrofit among the general public and in the construction industry, as well as a shortage of adequately trained installers, etc. How realistic is 2030 a target for retrofitting 28 million existing homes in the UK? And if that is not realistic, what would be an achievable target?
Wow. So I believe we can do this. You know, we built the rail network in with the war. They just sort of put the whole country to work, and I think it was within 2 weeks they had connected great swaths of the UK. And so we can do it if we want to. I think there's a real disconnect with skills in this country, and it's a global issue, a global West issue around education and inclusion. And so from my perspective, that's as long as I've been doing energy efficiency and retrofit, I've been doing paid accredited skills training for those ethnic minorities. So we run a BAME program for the last 9 years. I've been doing it, taking 14 to 20-year-olds, well, 14, 16 to 24-year-olds and teaching them about finance, IT, technical, legal, media, marketing of a community energy project, but also giving them skills on these things. And right now we are delivering 2 of these programs with UK Power Networks and other energy organizations, where we literally are training them, because there's a real lack of skills around engineering for the trades going in, but there's also a real disconnect with the corporate sector has a responsibility, because the entry level mechanical engineers and electrical engineers coming in to even these big companies who are turning £1 billion profit is 24,000. So you have a master's in engineering, and your entry level jobs are talking about 24 to 28,000 pounds. And to do these things, and the people say, oh well, why aren't we getting? We don't have the ability. We have to pay them more. So we need to skill people up. We need to pay them more. So that takes responsibility on both sides. So from my perspective and where we're working, I'm doing that on working with the corporate sector and the community sector to develop and build in training. So these are our job opportunities. You can do these things. But also we need to be pushing the government sector and anyone who's a councillor out there. You need to push any one of these major contractors who are working with the local authorities to employ local people and to make sure that they are engaging them in skilling programs. So when they're doing delivery of these large infrastructure programs, they say, oh, we will allow whatever 160 trainees for this £1 billion project, when actually they're not held to account. You have to hold these corporates to account, and then when they do it, because then those jobs will stay. So that is what true resilience is when we train the social capital to be able to facilitate the dynamic change that we need. It's not just around the building structure and infrastructure. It's actually about the upgrade of the intellectual wealth of the indigenous people of that area. So whether it's in Brighton or Balham or Broxted, wherever it is, that's what needs to be communicated. So I do think it's possible. I do think it needs to be there, and it needs to be clear narrative from government that employers need to be paying the right amount, that corporations will be held to account in the delivery, and that it is a skills area for young people to go into and make money at, and be able to provide their families with a reasonable return.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And it's great not only to hear that it is possible and it is achievable, but there's such a clearly practical way in which it can be achievable as well. So that's really a great answer there. Thank you. And Lauren, like to jump in?
I completely agree with everything you've just said, but I can't go without mentioning the 37 billion track and trace we've just had. That's money that the Conservatives are finding and passing to their mates. And the money, quite frankly, is there. And that's what I want to stress, is we can make these choices. We can make this retrofit revolution if we make the right choices with the money the government has.
No, thanks, Lauren. And I think there's always a lot of discussion around what money there is available for certain things, when suddenly you see that amount of money gets spent elsewhere. And we've seen many examples of that time and time again. And obviously the track and trace is one of the most recent examples of this, where we see a large amount, and then whatever sector you work in, someone who works in housing, you start thinking, oh well, that's all the different places that could have been applied, all the social housing that could have been built. It's the first person that goes through my head. But yeah, thank you very much. And I was going to ask for the next question. This is up to the panelists here, but do you think we could maybe have a 5-minute or so run over, so I could get through some more of these questions, as it seems there's an outrageous amount in this Q&A. So I'd maybe do like 2 or 3 more before we close up for the day. That work? Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone here joining does as well. So this next question here from Anthony is around whether you retrofit ventilation with heat recovery. The following statement is very efficient and saves losing all the heat. But firstly, whether you do or not, but also could you maybe explain a little bit about what that is and what that means?
Okay. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bill.
Right. Well, when you've super insulated a building, or when you've insulated a building to a reasonable level, you tend to find that half of your thermal demand, or the energy that you need to keep warm, is lost just exchanging air in the room to make it not smell stuffy and sweaty or whatever. So you've got to change that air. So if you're going to change the air and bring some air in from outside, what the heat recovery unit does is it takes the energy from that stale air and preheats incoming fresh air, normally with somewhere between a 70 and a 90% level of efficiency. The downside is that the commercial units have fans and filters which need replacing and really do break quite quickly. So it's not that clever. You can now, we were installing passive ventilation with heat recovery at Zed. I developed a system on that around the year 2000, and that worked very well. Is still working well. So at least you don't have fans driving the system, and you can get thermal buoyancy to drive the system when there isn't so much wind. So it's important. It's a good concept. Don't forget it. There are passive ventilation systems you can put on on chimneys, chimney pots. You can take out your wood or coal burning fireplace and turn it into a passive ventilation system for your home. One chimney pot is a down, supplying fresh air from the roof, and another room would have an extract. Or the same room at a high level would have an extract. And at the top, there's one of these passive heat recovery units that relies on wind pressure.
Cool.
So it's a good concept. I mean, the thing that makes me cross is people develop these products. They probably cost about £20 to make, and they try and sell them for £1,000. This has to stop. You can make all these technologies affordable if you went into volume production and got economies of scale, and that's the lesson. That's how you get green retrofit to work. You cut out the urethane foams, you cut out Kingspans, Celotexes, and all this junk, and you have to develop more appropriate technology, and you develop economies of scale quickly, which reduces the cost. But more importantly, you train local people up to fit it themselves. You don't need all this army of consultants and contractors and risk pricers and general hangers-on.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, very true. And just a couple more. This one's a very, very practical question here from S. Craig, and anyone jump in with any answer if you have one that could help, and try whether there's a single point of contact for information and guidance on retrofit domestic external ventilation. So they would like to find a building company that fully understands the processes and is enthusiastic.
Who's that aimed at?
I'm not sure, so I've left it open there. If anyone has the knowledge to maybe answer that question. Only it was upvoted 11 times, but we can always move. There's not an answer that we have. But,
well, do you know what? I really couldn't recommend a company. So there you are.
I would. What I'd say is that the Center for Alternative Technology has courses that you can take that are great, that teach you. I've done ones on deep wall retrofit stuff. We trialed all these different products. They also, and so definitely go to the Center for Alternative Technology, and also they have a bunch of information there about where to go. Having the right manufacturer and things, it changes a lot. As Bill says, there's a lots of cowboys out there who come up with a product and then try to sell it for a lot, and then and trade on the goodwill of the eco bling. But there are really good people doing great things all over the country. But yeah, there are people who are in your family of thinking, and I think that a good place to start is the Center for Alternative Technology. And then I think also just Googling in your local area and checking. I don't have one either. And even when we're looking for people to work on projects, I'm always going out to tender. I very rarely do a sole provider thing where I work with one organization, because you just need to keep everybody on their toes.
Can I suggest something really simple for the Green Party? If you set up a local shared tool bank, and that could include 3D printing and all the latest handheld power tools and the like, and you had free software, and you had training sessions, you would empower the local population to get the technical capability, but also the building physics understanding, and that would upskill people. And it can be and should be a DIY initiative. It doesn't need to be turned into this world of professionals and contractors, and all the government grants are tied up to basically employing somebody who has already has a large turnover and can show profitability and so on and so forth. So it's a self-perpetuating circle, really. You can't do it because you can't afford to do it, because everybody's not doing it, because they're risk pricing it, because there's no economies of scale. It's a virtual loop. The only way you break these things is by just going back to first principles and democratizing the technology and democratizing the physical opportunity of doing the work.
Yeah, Tyrone, I would add to that and say that I completely agree with Bill, and that is why I would also add that you could put in Community Energy England, Community Energy Wales, Community Energy Scotland, and then Community Energy Ireland. You've got the sort of, they all are working along these things, and it's all about community democratized energy. And whether we're working in Brixton or for me across London, we have energy efficiency stuff. So you've got the Remakery down in Brixton. You've got a whole bunch of people where that is literally what we're doing. Here's all the tools you need. So look for transition towns as well. Your local transition towns will have probably a building and energies group. And if they don't, they'd had one and it fell apart because they were looking for you to join. So I don't think that this is a job for the Green Party to actually get the software, but maybe it's a job for the Green Party to funnel interest to the local groups who are already doing it. And everyone, whether you're in Bedminster or Hornsey, you have these like transition groups. So I think that would be a great way to do that, to funnel people towards that. And if there is a great deal of interest, then start that group yourself, because as Bill says, it's really straightforward. And every community has all the resource they need. They're not lacking in anything. There's the mom and pop who can help you with this element or that, whether it's the finance or the tools, whatever. It's all right there, and that's what we've learned over the last 12 years working with community energy. The real resource is not the solar or the panels and the walls for installation. It's the human capital, and there's a lot of goodwill, and it's very simple, straightforward stuff.
Yeah, someone's posted that it's too difficult to fit external insulation on walls. Really, it's not. It's extremely straightforward if you understand the pitfalls, and these can be easily communicated. People all the time do really complex jobs. They use things called Haynes manuals. They repair really, really difficult internal combustion engines. They do things which are, frankly, unheard of even a century ago. Putting insulation on the outside of your house is really one thing you can do. Anyone.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for coming on there. They're both just really interesting. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, both as individuals, communities, and as a political party as well. To sort of ponder it and how we're going to get to actually apply these practical solutions. And I'm trying for one more here, and it's easy because it's actually told me who it's directed to. So I want to leave it open in the air. So Lauren, fuel poverty schemes in Wales are still concentrating mainly on installing oil and gas solutions to fuel poverty, and like ECO, Nest, etc. And what are the UK and Welsh governments still do? Why are the UK and Welsh governments still doing this? And how can the Green Party push policy moves away from this approach?
I love this question so much, and there are a few points to that answer, really. I mean, the first point of the question is, why are the UK and Welsh governments still doing this? And that is, quite frankly, because they do not and have not taken climate change seriously. We've known climate change is coming for years. They've had 40 years to act up in the case of the Welsh government, 20 years since its creation, and they could have acted by now and they haven't. And if they took it seriously in the beginning, then they could have put the research in, they could have put the effort in, and they would have stopped doing this by now. Oh, I got so fired up then I forgot the rest of the question. Okay, how can Green Party push policy moves away from this approach? Well, I'm sure you've seen in recent years other parties taking guidance from our manifesto for their own, which is fantastic. But the main way we push policy moves away from this approach is by being a threat to the larger parties, and we do that by getting elected.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lauren. And inspiring words there. So let's get more Greens elected. Is it the last message there from you, Lauren? I'm going to have to draw us to a close, unfortunately. I think we could all here listen to some more, but it's going to be good to let our great speakers go. But thanks very much once again to Lauren James, Agamemnon Otero, and Bill Dunster for joining us this evening. It was a really great conversation. And just a few closing remarks and just a few notes for the coming weeks. If you'd like to join for next week's event, we'll be gathering a few young Greens and seniors to share their activism journey and the people who inspired them along the way. And the link should be shared in the chat. And then in a few months, we will also be following up on this conversation around homes and empowering them with a conversation around creating a just and equitable energy transition to green energy, which considers the rights and lives of those outside this country. A link will be shared to that conversation too. And of course, if you're interested in becoming a member of the Green Party, Graham will share a link to where you can sign up in the chat. And if you're not quite ready to join the party, but interested in having a deeper look at our work, we welcome you to sign up as a Green friend. And Graham will once again share the link to the friend sign up as well. And finally, after this webinar ends, you'll be welcome to our donation page. So if you're in a position to help fund our green recovery plans, please do give. Wishing you all a great evening, thanks again to speakers, and thank you all for coming.